Okay, we are live. So this is like literally the first time we're talking, right?
Cool. Yeah, nice to officially meet you.
Yeah, so
I
you cold emailed me and then I'm like, let's just do a podcast. I've never like done this before. This is like the most like cold, I guess. Sounds weird, but like out of anybody. Like I've done podcasts with people I haven't met in real life, but I've like, interacted with them before online on Twitter and stuff. But this is like pretty, pretty I don't want to say cold. That sounds weird, but so it could either be awesome or it could be really awkward.
cool. Yeah, I mean, I'm honored to be the first of maybe this series. I don't know. Um,
Or the first of
yeah,
one.
yeah. And I read your cold email policies, and so I was really like worried about like not doing it right. So maybe thanks for having those, so that I was able to like get through the system.
Yeah, there's not really a system. I mean, like, I don't know. It's one of these things where like I I get I don't want to say like I got a lot of cold emails, but like I don't really feel like dealing with a lot of them, and also just get a lot of random emails from just school and other stuff. So but like when there's something that like genuinely catches my interest, I think it's good. So I mean, this is like a false positive, false negative thing, right? So like if on one hand I made it really, if I like turned on all my comments on everything and made it really easy for people to contact me, I get a lot of information and you might get some serendipity from that. But there's a lot of noise to weed through it. At this point in my life, I guess I rather just I forgot what's it's false negatives, I guess, right? Like I'd rather miss out on interesting things than like have to deal with noise. But it is a trade-off, right? I mean, you can't get the best of all worlds. And I remember earlier in my, I guess, online life, I was more you know, open to other, contact and stuff. But now I'm just like more closed off. So that's a weird way to start. But
Well, yeah, thanks for chatting. I guess I'm curious what caught your eye about my email, or how um, yeah, or like what was interesting about it.
I thought well, I mean, I don't know if it was just your email, but just your looking at your website, I guess. I've always had this interest in, people coming from kind of an artistic, more of a not only design, but more of an art, I would say, kind of background and aesthetic, and also doing programming.
Mm, yeah. Yeah, totally. Yeah, and I mean, that's cool. Yeah, I guess I know, like, I feel like maybe we have some crossovers in our worlds, but not totally sure. Um, but I feel like I'm not even sure how I first found out about your work. Maybe it was just through like some programming tutorials or
Hmm.
something. Somehow stumbled on to your website, and then like realized it was kind of like a vast like trove.
When was
Just
this around? Like,
Oh, I really don't know. I mean, I think I've probably like a few years ago, like I don't know, 3 or 4 years
oh,
ago.
okay.
Yeah, so I don't know. I'd been like a kind of secret admirer for a while, and I don't know. One of my goals this year actually is like to try to redo my website
Uh-huh.
in a longevity looking way, like
Hmm.
just because I think like it would be really cool to be posting on my same website for like the next 20 years. So
Hmm.
like that's like my goal. And I saw that you've had your website in different iterations for a
For
while,
a while,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, but I really admire how you've always kind of like kept it simple and kind of been like, it doesn't need to be fancy. Like, the content, I like, the design is simple. Like the content just speaks for itself kind of thing.
Well, thank you. That's my. I can put a very, I can put a very majestic interpretation. It's just that, like, one, I never learned design, and two, I never kept up with web technologies, and so it's like inadvertently, keeping things simple to the point where now, like, it's like, 15, 20 years later, like this, static sites and like minimalist design, that stuff has become like, and lightweight designs become like retro and cool again, right? People are like, how do I like get my site so that it's like not just 2 megabytes of JavaScript? Like, how do I just like make an HTML web page, like just basic web page? I guess that dovetails into some of the stuff you teach as well. But I just think it's funny how it's just kind of come around that, yeah, I started making a website in like the late 90s, right? Like when I was in think starting in middle school and high school, and then I saw the whole progression throughout. But I never, I've always been trapped in time in that way. I never like modernized anything.
That's cool. I mean, that seems like the way to be. Just riding on your own wave, I guess. Yeah, I mean, yeah, actually recently I started, or like I've been looking for my own constraints, I guess, to make a simple website, just because I think, yeah, constraints are power, especially in the world of websites, which can be so vast. And one thing I've been experimenting with lately is just an HTML editor. I think it's like a Gmail extension that where you can write HTML in your Gmail. And it's funny because it's pretty primitive. Like it doesn't recognize certain HTML5 elements.
So do you know what it's called? I'm just writing these for the notes.
I remember the company that runs it is called Cloud HQ. And I think it's just called HTML editor in Gmail.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm just writing these notes so we can like link to them. But yeah, whatever you mention, I'll just write down.
Cool. Yeah, but I guess with my students, I haven't ever tried an email newsletter assignment, but I feel like that could be like a cool intro to HTML just because it's so like immediate and you're only making one page. It's almost like coding by hand.
Yeah, and like with these, whatever services, it is just like a GUI thing, right? It's basically, it's like you're writing in Google Docs. I mean, I was gonna say like Microsoft Word or Front Page, but no one uses that. I mean, it's like Google Docs, right? I mean, it's literally like Google Docs where you just go, and even like, if people want a version 0 of their page, they just literally make a Google Doc and just share the URL, right? I mean, it looks terrible, but it's it like informationally conveys, right? It's almost like. I think some people, I don't know if they have this anymore, right? But they used to have like Google Docs just renders to some like really basic Google rendered looking web page thing that looks like.
Oh yeah, like Google Sites. I think.
I don't know if like, they killed so many of the products. I don't know if that exists, but like that's reasonable, right? You're writing a Google Doc and you say publish and it looks like a, basic website with some URL. You're like, okay, that's fine. And you can update it, right? Which is cool, right? Like there's like no friction to update it.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah, that reminds me that my roommates and I were just we were just collaborating on a Google Doc that we've been sharing with some people. That's called Instagram hacks. But what I mean hacks is just like just to use Instagram like imaginative or agency filled ways. Just because it's such a silo or such a so confined like what you can do. But that's been a fun thing to collaborate on. And then we just linked it in our bios on Instagram, the Google Doc, and made it so anyone can edit it.
Wait, so what is it specifically? So you have Instagram, and then what do you do with it? Like,
yeah. So we basically have all these like instructions in this document about like ways you can use Instagram more imaginatively. I mean, one of them, for example, is like create a personal meme, like a meme that you make up, maybe like not mainstream meme. Another one could be like, I'm having this thinking. I like this one called Account as Album, which is because Instagram lets you have multiple accounts. If you wanted, you could just think of an account as like an album for your trip. It doesn't have to be like an identity. It's not like the best tool, but I guess if you are going to use Instagram, I feel like there are ways you can.
Yeah, this is really fascinating. So I have not dived into the Instagram world at all. I like try not to install that many apps on my phone usually. So like I just have like YouTube on here that I just use as a video watcher. But I have just not dived into the Instagram world at all. I mean, that is obviously a huge world, and I kind of watch, I kind of learn about it tangentially through watching YouTube videos. But I think it's this vast world. And your thing is so interesting because like it kind of reminds me of like in the old days, there were these like O'Reilly books, right? It's like 50 hacks for, using, whatever, right? But it's like, it's like these things where it's the platform is really constrained, which is a good thing because then it's not, a kitchen sink. And then there's so many people on it. So rather than being like, oh, I need to like use, whatever Picasso or Flickr for my travel album, let's just use Instagram because all my friends are on it already and everything. So like there's something really powerful about that, right? Like that platform, people are all on it. So let's co-opt it to do these interesting different things.
Right. Right. Yeah, and there are always all of these like really funny limitations. Like, you can technically post from the browser on Instagram, but you have to like, enable the web inspector, like device mode, and you have to enable like iPhone X in order to do all the features.
Oh, so you pretend the browser's an iPhone browser?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's like one of of
Yeah, right,
I think
right.
that's the first hack. Yeah. But yeah, I don't know. It's been fun thinking that up.
And is that page linked from your webpage, the doc?
Oh, not yet. I think
Okay.
it's on I'm actually taking a social media fast right now, and
Oh, okay, yeah.
so I just like linked it from my Instagram bio.
Oh, okay.
So
Instagram bio.
yeah,
And is your Instagram bio public?
yeah, it
Okay,
is.
okay, hold on.
Yeah.
I'm just writing this down.
Okay.
Wait, so wait, you're saying you're taking a social media fast. We should talk about that. But how did that preclude you from linking from your home page?
No, I know. I'm sorry. I think
Sorry.
I'm like gradating off, So
Yeah.
yesterday was my first day, so it's like I'm keeping a little bit of a log about how it's going.
Uh-huh.
Trying to last a month, and I'm doing it with two or three of my friends. And one of our friends made this alternative social media site. I guess what I'm saying is it's like a mainstream social media fast. So like Instagram and Twitter, at least for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, but my friend Elliot made this website called special.fish, and it's quite simple, but you can make a profile and basically create lists of things and look at other people's profiles. It's pretty primitive, but I guess I just like that it's social. It's social, but like a kind of like lightweight social.
So is it just your friends using it right now, or is it actually something a little bit bigger?
It started with just friends, and now I think there's like something like a couple hundred people on it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's I was reading a few things about this recently, and there's this, so Nadia Eghbal, who's been on my podcast, she writes a lot about online community. She wrote this essay called Hidden Cities, and it's basically, it's like saying how, there's some, local restaurant, right, that only the locals know about, and then like some like food reviewer from some hip magazine comes and reviews it, and then it turns into this tourist destination. It gets ruined because all these tourists come, and then it overwhelms the restaurant or whatever. And I think it's similar with these sorts of online communities, right? Like if it's advertised widely, it went viral or something, some, celebrity posts about it, and then all these people come, it kind of ruins it in a sense, right?
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Yeah. I had a conversation like a year ago with my friends and we decided that a restaurant is just a physical blog, I guess. I don't know if that. Yeah.
All right, tell me about that.
I mean,
that was random.
Okay, sorry. I feel like it's like kind of related to what you're talking about, but
I thought I misheard. Okay, restaurant is a physical blog.
Yeah, I guess just that. But each post is like handcrafted and like editioned, I guess. Post being the food.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. But yeah, I guess. Sorry, I have like a lot of thoughts.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah, we were talking about how restaurants, at least like restaurant websites, for example, are one of the last bastions of personality on the web.
Oh yes, that's right. Yes.
Yeah, and because like they're slowly getting eaten up by like Yelp pages and just having Instagrams or whatever. But food is something that like isn't scalable, I guess. And so it does like allow for more nuance in their websites, I guess.
Yeah, and this is a really fascinating topic. I mean, on a related note, it's like the food isn't scalable thing it's interesting because it's like it makes it possible for you to do it's hyper local, right? So it's like if someone had the world's best, Chinese restaurant somewhere, it doesn't mean you can't open a really good one right in your town because one doesn't exist right near you. So you can just do the same damn thing and it could be awesome, right? Whereas, an online, I mean, the opposite, I guess, is like making Facebook or whatever, right? It's like, it's like completely global, completely network effect. Like it's hard for you to make a second Facebook that succeeds in that way. But it's like, there are a lot of restaurants that can succeed in their local niche. And, yeah. And the related thing is like these restaurant websites, right? It's funny because a lot of them are like, I wonder what happens if like restaurants, also restaurants often go out of business or they change owners and stuff. And I suspect that a lot of these websites are still up because people don't know how to take them down, right? Like it's just some hosting service they paid for like 10 years or whatever, right? And then no one has the password. The original people disappear and the restaurant website's still up. Yeah.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, I mean, that kind of reminds me what you said about like, if you like a restaurant, you could create your own version somewhere else. I guess reminds me of like where social media could go in the future, or like I guess like things like Mastodon or like instances of a Twitter that are more local or like specific around a community. I feel like I would really like to see social media go more that way.
Yeah, I think there is this thing in the zeitgeist now, right, of going, to semi-private groups. And I think that, maybe it's just the people I hang around or you hang around too, but it's like, there's this cliche of oversaturation of Facebook and Twitter and fully public social media and going more private or semi-private, right? So like in my latest newsletter, I talked about how I actually just quit most social media. I wasn't even on that many, right? I deleted my Facebook account, which I haven't used for that long. And then I deleted all my tweets, and I still keep Twitter just to read because I like reading it, and I also do direct messages. But I, don't respond or tweet anymore. And then I had LinkedIn, which I never use either. And I never had Instagram or Snapchat or TikTok or anything. And I'm trying to put more energies towards newsletters, toward just texting people and direct messaging people and stuff. And like, it almost reminds me of the really old days of like instant messengers, where it was only one-on-one and maybe small group chats. And that was like our, when I grew up, mostly in the late 90s, that was our, internet life. And also in college in the early 2000s, pre-social media, our internet life was AOL Instant Messenger and just always messaging our friends or even our online friends and stuff. So it's funny how everything goes around, just like the personal website thing, right? Everything in 20 years comes back to this, to at least my childhood.
Yeah. Yeah, I also used AIM. I remember like having a lot of fun with like away messages too.
Yeah. Yeah, I also remembered the icon, your avatars or whatever, like they were just like really low resolution, right? Like I think you could have icons, but they're pretty low res. I don't think anyone had their actual picture because back then people didn't have digital cameras. So people just like got some random cartoons from web pages, like a dog or whatever. And I remember that they let you do animated GIFs after a while. So I made like these simple animated GIFs as my icon thing, and I would just animate, and that was cool.
Wow, that is really cool. That reminds me of like the gesture of using a face as your avatar on social media is such a specific one. And I guess I'm thinking about this because like some people I know have recently changed their avatars from like an icon to a face. I think like in hopes of being actually like more professional or more like, I mean, and I know that you use a face, but I think from what I assume it would be because like you're a university professor and it's like a certain level of like, I don't know, recognizability or professionalism. Is that right?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, it's funny because I just had my university photo, whatever, right? And before I still had a regular face picture, but it was more informal, I guess. But yeah, I just have the same photo I use everywhere, probably. Like I guess like on other random profiles, like on GitHub or on other things, I don't care as much about. They're just random photos. But yeah, I think on the major ones, probably, right? But yeah, that I don't have too much to say about it. Not too many insights.
No. I mean, maybe it's also because like I come from this world of like I talk to a lot of artists all the time, and artists are always like messing with their avatars, changing it all the time. Like could be a color or like an icon or even like someone else's logo.
Or someone else's
Yeah.
face.
Yeah, exactly. Kind of playing with identity, I suppose. Um, but yeah, I wonder if maybe we could talk about teaching a little
Sure.
bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I know you teach a lot. I mean, obviously you're a professor. Yeah. Are you what kind of classes are you teaching these days?
So I think my main undergrad classes are, I would say I have three different types of classes. So there's like kind of an intro HCI, human computer interaction design course for undergrads where we used to do it with kind of web programming, but then I kind of dropped it. So the latest iteration of this course is basically just using Figma, just using, just the kind of user-centered design process. And we end with kind of a medium to high fidelity mock-ups. And it's a pretty standard thing where, students go and we have some project ideas and they go and observe people or interview people and do need finding and user research, and then low fidelity paper prototypes and storyboards, and they get feedback, and then they end with some, mock-up of stuff. And they kind of end with like a story, right? Kind of a case study or portfolio piece. And then the more advanced class I have is it does involve web programming, and it's kind of Node.js, and it has some front end and mostly back end stuff. And again, it's the same kind of spiel of have a project idea, have a team of 3, and then, try to make something you can put on your portfolio that, shows you've done some kind of a real-ish project. And then my other sets of courses, I have an undergrad and a grad course, and those are just straight up research paper courses. Those are straight up very much reading papers in the field and talking about them and stuff. So like, yeah, I would say that those three clusters. And before I've always kind of taught, basic web programming-ish sort of things. And I've like, I think it's been fine, but I've had a lot of, I guess you could probably speak to this too, just like that modern web stuff is just so complicated, and like you can kind of carve off a subset of it to teach, but then it seems like not modern and not as real. And then you're like, no, but like you could just learn all this stuff later, and we just want to get something basic. So like I've never been like super, like that part of my life has never been like felt like it gelled, right? Like, oh, I have like the best thing for doing web programming, whatever. But like I think teaching the research paper stuff, I think I have a grasp on, and the just like low fidelity prototyping design stuff without programming, I feel like pretty happy about, because I'm like, okay, we take the programming out of it. We're just focusing on design process, and you all can just learn to use these, Illustrator, Figma like tools like reasonably easily. So
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I guess I also take a similar approach with web programming, that like everything is always changing like every year. So usually what I teach in my interactive design classes are the foundations that like won't change, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And I guess usually it's mostly front end. I've also taught PHP because I guess like I think it's something like 30% of the web is PHP because
probably,
of WordPress. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And also like there's a lot of, just thinking about people app development, right? If they're going to be building a WordPress plugin, or if they're going to be maintaining one, right? That like they have some site that is WordPressy, and then they just need to make alterations or stuff. Yeah. I mean, the positive thing about web stuff, I think, is that like, the possibilities are so amazing now, right? That just with straight up JavaScript, and the whatever APIs are built in the browsers, you can access the webcam, you can access, computation. Like, I think that's really cool. Like, I've kind of seen that, in that way, that has gotten better than, 10, 15 years ago, where the browsers were like, you couldn't do much, and like, it was inconsistent, and it was just really weird. But now it's like, really, the browser's like a fully fledged operating system. It takes user input. You can like plug stuff into it. It has cameras. You can like plug it into other devices. And I think that's really cool. Like, the trade-off, of course, is all the complexity goes with this. If you can kind of carve out all the complexity, and like, like stuff like P5.js and some of these other frameworks on top try to simplify kind of webby development with just a simple API, call a function and get your webcam image or something are kind of cool for these sorts of classes.
Yeah. Yeah, that all sounds fun. I feel like, um, yeah, I wonder how you know. Yeah, I don't know what to say. Yeah, with the high tech stuff, it's always like, oh, I think for me with my students, it's easy for people to get like swamped in like the high tech stuff and like not know it's actually interesting. You know what I mean? Or not know that. Um, I guess it's just like such a world, and it's like very deep. Um, to know if something's actually interesting there, if that makes any
Yeah,
sense.
I mean it's
Yeah.
I mean I think the the confusion, the meta confusion is representative of the confusion of the student. Is that like there's so much stuff to possibly look into, and the other related thing there is like, you know, the one of the reasons why for my intro course I decided to not have coding in it is because, you know, basically what happened with all the coding stuff is, you know, you do all this design stuff. It's like, great, we have ideas for these apps to build, and we talk to users, and we're doing paper prototypes, and like we're doing mock. This is great. And then like, oh, it's the last 3 weeks of class. Let's actually implement this. Then it's like, oh my God, what's going on? Right. It's like, then they spend all their time figuring out all this web stuff that like this distance from their vision to what they actually can build is so great. Right. And it's very demoralizing. And it's
Mm-hmm.
something that people who haven't programmed a lot before don't realize, like just how vast that gulf is. Right. And that's really kind of demoralizing.
Yeah, totally. Um, that's cool. I mean that's I like the idea of doing a design or a programming or like an interactive class that's only mock-ups and sketches and like interviews, because that's like such an important part of the process. Yeah, I feel like I oftentimes tell my students this line that's like, um, it's important when you're showing your final work, like no matter how real it is, to show the gap between implementation and or aspiration and implementation in a compelling way so that you can lead others to like understand your vision, I guess. Just because that gulf is so huge. And so I feel like for especially for design students,
Hmm.
the challenge is to like convey your vision
Hmm.
in the most like world buildy way so other people can like hop on.
Yeah. And that's a, yeah, like there's always this that's like you brought this, there's really interesting tension. You know, we have, you know, in many of our classes, because people from all sorts of different majors take it, you know, there are, say, computer science majors who've been programming for a long time, and there's folks in other majors who are not, you know, as experienced in programming. And like it's I can see how both sides, you know, have frustrations. For example, like the students from like a very computer sciencey background, they're like, oh, look, all these projects that seem to be doing well, like they're winning these hackathons or getting prizes and stuff, and they're just all story, right? They're all about vision and the story and stuff. And on the other end, you know, that the students who don't have as much of the programming expertise, they're like, oh, we want to implement these sorts of things, but we just can't do it. So like, um, in the end, like I think I lean more on the side that you just mentioned of like the, you know, the artifact is really kind of a vision for the future, and a prototype that gets you kind of the way there, and you know, if you take kind of a product management viewpoint, or I guess a design viewpoint, like a better term, that's the more important thing to convey, the story and the narrative, right? Whereas, you know, the
Hmm.
people from the very computer science end feel that that's like vaporware, and that's like, oh, that's not real and stuff. So there is this two culture sort of gap there, I see.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and that reminds me of something I talk about sometimes in my classes is like when you're starting programming, kind of, or at least maybe I'm going to say like making websites, which isn't always programming necessarily, but one of your tasks is kind of to understand the materiality of the web, and like kind of you can only really understand it by like fiddling around with it.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Let's talk more about that. I love that word. I think I saw you use that in a talk or in something. A talk about materiality. Yeah, I like that.
oh, cool. Yeah. I mean, I think there's this phrase called like the web's grain, which this designer, Frank Chimero or Chimero, I don't know how to say his last name, but has, and basically it's like this metaphor, when you're woodworking, there's a grain of the wood and you're supposed to like cut along with it. Similarly, the web has its own grain and you kind of want to work with it. And something I always start my classes with is a history of the internet and the web, and talking about how the web was first made to share documents. And so, like, the reason the web is the way it is, and like why CSS is like weird. Oh, and there's this really great video called "Why is CSS Weird" that Mozilla published recently. But basically, it says like the reason CSS is so weird and like why text sometimes like goes out of boxes is because it's like a content preserving language. Like it's the web was made for documents, so HTML is like a markup language for documents. CSS, is just styling, like a presentation layer on those documents. But CSS is actually designed to degrade gracefully depending on what device you're using. So when you design with CSS, you need to like be careful that you design it in such a way that like the user could override it or whatever. And then another thing we talk about a lot now in the age of mobile phones, I suppose, is like responsiveness, obviously. And I guess I like to think of like the way the web flows. Like, since the web was primarily made to share documents and it's text-based, really like everything on the web, like inline things just want to go like in a line, And so if you kind of embrace that everything wants to go in a line, even with like a navigation or something, that can be like a good tactic to kind of make an inherently responsive website.
Yeah, that's like really profound. And that goes with the grain idea too, right? Like the grain is, if you view, like in a matrix or whatever, you like view the web as this flowing thing. And then like, oh, the form of that is it, you force it to not flow or whatever. And, yeah, that's amazing. So my other confession is I never learned any of that, right? So that's why my site is, it's just a bunch of tables and it's all fixed width, right? Because I never learned any of that.
Oh. I mean, but I think your site is mostly text-based. So, I mean, at least you got some things right. Is your site responsive or?
No, it's not.
No? Oh. Oh. That's okay. I'm sure just a few lines of CSS if you ever wanted to, but maybe it's not worth it.
That's hilarious in that, like, it's yeah, because so I think the site, the way it looks now, is around like 2006-ish, I would say. Like around 2006 was when I made the site look like this, and that was back when like a lot of the more advanced CSS things weren't around, and like it's like. People joke, but especially that's like, how do you just make a table-like layout in CSS? And it was like impossible, right? I was just like, oh my God, this is so hard to do. So then back then, that 2006 era, like CSS was getting more mature, but it was still non-trivial to like, I just want to make like a somewhat reasonable table-like layout. And they're like, oh, this is really hard to do. And also there weren't as good tutorials and stuff back then. So I'm like, wait, I'm just going to just stick with this tables. Cause like conceptually, it just makes so much more sense. Like it's just, because like I was used to like, I don't know, if you're using Microsoft Word or whatever and you're making a document with like a table and there's rows and columns and you can just like, you can set their widths and then you can like combine rows and columns if you want into bigger ones. And it's like, I get that. But yeah, that grain thing just totally passed me. And then since 2006, I basically haven't updated anything.
Oh, wow.
So
do you think you will, or is there no reason?
Now that you show me the light, maybe. It's funny also because speaking of professional, both due to lack of time and also it's I mean, this is a really interesting topic that I'll hopefully talk more about later on as I get farther along my career. But like in the last few years, since I'm fairly early in this tenure track career, I have turned my homepage into sort of this like professional homepage, right? Like it looks like there's my professional bio up front and there's like awards and like students and papers and whatever. And of course I have all my actual content hidden below it. But like a kind of fear of mine was another thing of telling all my horrible habits is that I am not on HTTPS, right? So like because I'm just like, I don't want to rock the boat at all, both due to lack of time and also because I have professional colleagues who are checking my site for things. Right? For example, if I'm getting reviewed for a promotion or if I'm getting even if like, for example, I'm submitting a grant proposal for review or like awards or things, like I want everyone to just Google my name and just hit the site and have it work, right? Like I don't want anything going down. I want to work. I don't want it to like look all weird on someone's browser. I just know like this thing from 2006, I know it works on my phone. I know it works on all the browsers. I don't want to rock the boat at all. I don't want to put HTTPS on because like one day the certificate expires and that's like you get this red screen and like, yeah. So that's sort of why it's kind of frozen in amber. Part of it is like, this goes back to the whole professional profile photoing thing, is that like, it's sort of a vehicle for at any time someone from my profession could check it and I want them to like see the right thing fast and access, my papers, access all that stuff fast. But like, I have this dream of like, when I was younger, right, my page didn't have to be like that at all, right? And it started with my photos and other weird, even super weirder things. Mm-hmm. And I want to be able to like eventually go back to that. But in the last few years, since I'm building up my career, I don't have that. So,
right.
Yeah.
No, that's super interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that kind of tension between professional and like what the web could be for us as humans is like an interesting one that I feel I see a lot of my friends kind of grappling with in their own ways. Yeah, it's like when do you know that you're at a certain level in your career that your website, you can just do kind of whatever you want with your website, is an interesting one. Yeah, I'm actually, like I told you, I'm currently trying to redo, or actually I'm going to not redo it, but like make a new website. I like the idea of almost having multiple websites for myself. Like, you have like the professional portal, maybe you have like this other one, maybe they have like interesting cross-pollination. I haven't like worked it out yet. I don't have like a complete system, but what was I going to say? Oh yeah, I was going to say one of my goals for this site that I'm making is that it would kind of be like the site I think that I like that would help me as a human almost, or like it's going to be mostly writing based.
Yeah,
and it's like, I think I heard this quote that I think from Maria Popova, who runs that blog Brain Pickings. She said like the internet is inherently a self-perfecting medium, especially like, when you're writing on it. This idea that, you write into the code, you kind of format it, you look at it in your browser, you like somehow like the publicness of the website like makes you reread it in a different way. And then, you go back and edit it. Maybe also it's public, so people like give you feedback and you edit it some more. And so I'm really into this idea of like a website being a self-perfecting medium for not only itself, but like for you as a person. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, that's a really interesting mission. I really like this. And it's like, it's one of these things where, again, I always bring up tensions between two sides. They're like, it's one of these things where like, I know I'm always just frustratingly bringing up tensions, but I like on one hand having that mission, right? Like your mission for this new site design is to help you improve as a person, your thought processes and your whatever. And another reason for someone making a website is for their business or whatever. It's like, I'm starting a small business. I need to make a website for that. And you go down that path, or like for a, academic career or whatever. And I think on one hand, that's really cool. And on the other hand, like I have people who come to me who want to start, making YouTube videos or websites or whatever. And they were kind of afraid because they don't have that clear point of view or that clear mission. And then I want to tell them like, just don't worry about that. Like just do stuff that's kind of interesting to you and just produce stuff, right? So like when I started out, I didn't really have any mission or anything. So I just think it's fascinating. And I think that like, you have more experience in this world of design and teaching and thinking in public and stuff. So like, you're not, a beginner who's starting from scratch. So perhaps perhaps the path for people like yourself with more experience is to have that focus and mission, because otherwise then it can just be overwhelming. Right?
Yeah. I mean, I like what you're saying too, because I think just there's something interesting that happens when, for example, like you as a university professor who like, has this specific status, for example, talks about like, I don't know, your favorite song in a YouTube video. And then like, you start almost like taking the perspective of a university professor looking at this song, and like that perspective kind of makes you study the song in a different way, if that makes sense. There's like an interesting thing that happens, I guess, like when you like mix high and low status. You know what I mean? Just like as the lens of viewing. I'm reading this book right now about improvisation. That in like one of the first chapters is called Status.
What is
it's
the book
by
called?
Yeah, it's called Impro, and it's by Kenneth Johnstone.
Huh.
I think
Okay.
it was written in like the 50s or the 60s or
Oh wow, so
70s.
it's pretty old. Cool.
Yeah, it's pretty old, but the first chapter is about status, and it says that like the basis of all comedy and tragedy is like changes in status. And then the next chapter is about spontaneity and like how to harness spontaneity. It's kind of about, just starting anywhere. And like first thought is like best thought, like just go, like don't overthink
So
it.
is that one of the classic books about improv? Is that one of the like ones that people study?
I really don't know.
You
I
just
just know,
found
yeah, it's been on my Amazon list for like 5 years. So I took the plunge.
That's really funny. It's it's funny you mentioned that because like I'm not, you can imagine people who are professors or scholars talking about pop culture, but from like a very researchy perspective. Right? There are people who do like media studies, right? Who do like comparative media studies. Like, so I got at MIT, they had a comparative media studies department. I took some classes of like, there's like classic stuff like film studies, right? Film studies is like a classic thing. And then also just like art studies, but like more contemporary is like people who do like social media, right? Like studies of social media and, different kinds of internet culture and stuff. But it's funny because like I don't actually do any of that myself, right? Like that's not my research area. And it's just that, when I talk about these things, it's just me as a person, but this also gets to the identity thing, right? It's like I purposely have my website and I guess YouTube now and newsletter. Like it's purposely not about being an academic or about research or about teaching or whatever. It's basically about whatever is on my mind. But it just happens that most things on my mind are related to tech or research or teaching or whatever. But like, yeah, it's like whatever's on my mind that I'm okay sharing publicly, I guess. So it kind of, like the videos every week are pretty random. Like they're pretty random. Like it's not like I'm going to it's whatever's on my mind. But yeah, so.
Yeah, I mean, it makes me wonder, like, if there was a world where we didn't all have to have official jobs, like, what your website would be like.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting that, like people in my own profession know about the subset of the stuff I do that's most relevant. So like, people know about, like the articles I write about, getting into graduate school or getting scholarships or applying for faculty positions or like, I put up, periodically I put up these, materials that are of very practical interest to the academic community, right? About writing papers, all the stuff that's involved in the process. And it's interesting because the people in my own profession know me from that, right? They're like, oh, he's the one who writes about these things and like, they're useful and stuff, which is great. But then it's funny because like, 95% of the stuff I do is about, Blink-182 or whatever, right? Just whatever stuff. But that's also the thing I tell people about like just producing a lot of stuff in that sense that like, there's some article about this I've probably lost track of, but it's like, the audience for selected things will just find itself, right? It's like, if only 5% of the stuff I do is relevant to people in academia, then they find those at 5% and they're like, oh, he's the person who does that thing. And that's cool. So, but like, I think that, quantity isn't the only approach, right? That's one possible approach, right? Like, I don't think I want to force everyone into a mindset of just producing a lot of stuff, right? Like that's, for some people, I think that's great because that gets, like people are like, oh, I'm going to, like I have a friend, Carolyn, who I want to get on the podcast. She was actually one who inspired me to do the podcast, but she hasn't gone on yet. And she's trying to do like writing 100 things this year or something, right? Like 100 little pieces of whatever. And like, or like there's like people who are like, I made 100 websites in a year or whatever, 100 websites, 100 days. Like there's something good in that repetition, but then there's also like something good in like not rushing it and having that thing to hone. So I don't know, like I have no answers.
Yeah, it's hard to know when to do which medium. I mean, one of the things I really like about teaching, I guess, is how generative it is for my own like thinking and practice, just because you get to ask really big questions like what's worth learning, or like, what would be a fun assignment kind of thing. And I think I almost wish all of my students had to teach too. Yeah, or like, like lead a workshop. And sometimes I think about like my ideal school. I guess like if I were to go back to school, I think it would be a kind of thing where my friends and I were all teaching and being students, like taking turns, I guess.
So what was your college, and you went to design school, and tell me about a little bit of your college, and then you did a MFA, I think, or I actually don't know because I don't do my homework, so I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. So I graduated from Rhode Island School of Design with a BFA in graphic design. But I actually like transferred from a small liberal arts school because at first I actually wanted to be like a biochem major. And yeah, in high school, I was actually really into science. I was like a science and art person.
Cool.
But then, my first year of undergrad, I went to like this small liberal arts school called McAllister, which was great. But I just realized that I wasn't like that passionate about chemistry or bio anymore for some reason. I think maybe it was like the teachers in my high school were really passionate and like were actually really good teachers. Yeah, and there was something like I could just tell the chemistry teachers at my college were kind of like distracted or something. And I don't know, now as a teacher, I kind of understand, or a professor, I kind of understand. But at the same time, I feel like teaching, like really good teaching, is a kind of performance, and it should like utilize all sorts of strategies to get people engaged and like have fun. But yeah, I guess I don't have a master's actually. Like after I graduated in 2010 from RISD, I moved to New York and worked for this small design studio called Link by Air that mostly does websites. And we were working on like institutional art websites, like the Whitney Museum's website. Cool. And
like their main website, the Whitney Museum's their main site. That's cool.
Yeah. One of the cool things about that site was that it had a day and night mode, specific to New York. Yeah, pretty early, like 2010. And then at New York sunset, no matter where you were in the world, if you caught New York sunset for 30 seconds, there would be a specific web-based artwork that would appear on the site for 30 seconds.
That's cool.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, mostly it was because Dan and Tamara, who run Link by Air, they went to Yale in the early 2000s as grad students. That's how I started eventually teaching at Yale, just through working with them for a long time. So I guess, I don't know, I would love to go to grad school sometime, but I haven't really found the right fit yet.
Yeah, and I think for your world, it's like it's not as much of a necessity too. And it's like we have, there are people who, both the BFAs and MFAs who are teaching in various design schools and stuff. So I'm curious about, talking about identity, like, how would you identify yourself professionally, nowadays, in terms of, what terms would you describe yourself without any leading terms?
Right. Yeah, it's funny because on my website, I have a bio section, and if you click the date, you can get to past bios, and you can see that like I keep on changing the words I use.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah, but lately I say something like I'm a designer, writer, webmaster, I don't know, professor. Sometimes I throw artist in there. I mean, I don't know. It's all kind of like soupy to me. Like I take on a lot of different roles, and that's kind of part of the fun of it.
But do you think there are other, like, do you feel like there's a cohort of other people like you with this sort of multifaceted identity, or do you feel like you're kind of unique in that, like, I don't know many other people who are doing, so many identities, and maybe some people are a designer and a teacher, or an artist and a teacher or something, but like kind of straddling more grounds? I mean, do you feel like you have a cohort, or does it feel like you're on your own?
Oh, I think I have somewhat of a cohort. I mean, I, but at the same time, I think I'm unique. I don't know. It's kind of confusing. I do have to say, like, I think out of like my friends, I'm the one who's like more interested in the web. Um, I think, yeah, and it's funny because, yeah, I've been making websites since I was like in middle or in elementary school, like in the 90s, and I kind of can't believe that I'm still doing it in a way.
Hmm.
And I just started because it was fun and because I was in a really specific community of people who liked horses and
So
was
how did
making,
so what, yeah? Tell me about
yeah,
the early website making. When and how did you do it? Yeah, let's go back to that.
yeah, yeah. So I think I first learned HTML because of this website that was like the Neopets for horses. It's called horseland.com and it's still online.
Wow.
And I just remember you would sign up and you would automatically get a homepage that was like your horse stables
Oh,
homepage.
cool.
And you had the ability to customize your homepage using like some basic HTML and CSS. So
Now, was that like a
people,
web-based editor? Was it like a WYSIWYG thing, or is that like you wrote
oh,
like
I actually don't think it was WYSIWYG. I think you would just press edit and then you would like see the code.
and you actually
And then,
edit the HTML and CSS in that's cool. So it's like a web-based IDE. So it's not like you're on Notepad like I was, typing and then like using some FTP thing to go on a server. Like the server stuff's taken care of, but it still exposes you to the raw code, which is cool.
right. Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, that was like kind of the baby step. And then eventually,
that's cool.
I did what you did and got my own GeoCities site.
Hmm.
Um, so I was interested in horses and I was specifically like collecting like toy horses or model horses. Like there's like a whole hobby behind collecting them. They're like about, like this big or whatever. And I had like that was like my passion. And eventually I learned that you could paint your own horses. Like you would get a horse and paint it a custom color by like priming it white and then doing layers of color on top of it. And I just met this whole community that did this, and it was like mostly middle-aged women, and I was like 12 or something. And then I got into this private Yahoo group and like learned a lot. And I wrote an essay about this that I can link you to.
Wow.
Um, but it's kind of like it was actually like a really supportive place because it was a private group of just about 12 people.
Yeah.
But yeah, I started this GeoCities site called Sweetbriar Equestrian. Sweetbriar was the name of the street I grew up on. And it just was like a showcase of my model horses that I had
So you
painted.
took pictures of these horses? Was
Yeah.
it a digital camera then, or a physical non-digital camera?
Oh, I use digital.
Oh wow,
Yeah.
so it's very early for digital
Yeah,
cameras.
pretty
Yeah,
early.
that's super early. Um, and how did you communicate? Where is the essay? Is it on your website?
No, it's on this website called allmyfriendsatonce.com. Maybe I can chat it to
Yeah, just
you.
pull up the link because it's good to just do it now, so I can just
Yeah,
throw it in the
yeah.
doc. Um,
Um,
you can look for that in a bit. Yeah, if you can look for that, that'd be great. Okay, awesome.
yeah.
Wow, that was fast. Hold on. Now I can't find my Skype thing. No, this is great. Um, so much stuff here. Oh, here we go. Oh my gosh, it's recording. I don't know. Like the UI might have wonkied. Um, yeah, so many questions. Oh, this is cool. I
I,
So tell me about the community aspect, right? So before you got in this Yahoo group, like how did you communicate with these other people who were interested in horses? You put up your website in this thing, and like, what was the communication?
yeah. So the reason I got into it was just because I found this tutorial online about how to customize your horse using this special technique
Hmm.
of ground up chalk pastels.
Hmm.
Just because there are a lot of different ways to paint a horse.
Yeah.
And this one was cool because it was almost like applying layers of makeup.
Uh-huh.
And there was like this very like dreamlike, like feathery
Huh.
kind of thing. And you would just spray like fixative and then build layers on top of layers. But basically, this artist, her name is Jennifer Danza. I haven't talked to her like, in a long time, but she had a website with a tutorial and I followed it and I emailed her. I was like, hey, I followed your tutorial and here's my result. And I like sent some pictures.
That's so cool.
And yeah, then she was like, hey, do you want to join my private Yahoo group?
So she had this private group. That is so cool.
Yeah. So I just got plugged in. I feel really lucky almost.
Yeah, and there's another one of these hidden cities things, right? These kind of private group sorts, and people have Facebook groups now, right? Private Facebook groups and stuff, and it's like, yeah, and it's like, and now thinking about my history with the web, like I never really got into the community aspect of any of it. It was much more, and maybe that's what informs my viewpoints today. Of I don't really want community as much, right? Like I don't have comments on, I don't really crave community as much as I'm interested in broadcast, kind of broadcasting knowledge and sharing stuff. And, but like obviously a lot of people like yourself and others got into, Neopets and those sorts and fan fiction communities and those things early in the, I say early to mid 2000s. It's a tremendously powerful force. And like, just kind of reading a bit about this, it's interesting because like a lot of times the public associates social media and online communities with these sorts of like really, large scale kind of toxic things with, all this conflict and stuff. But like, I think there's such a great long tail, right? Like these 12 people in the like, this, horse model group, like it's sort of self-policing in a way, right? It's like, it is like a small group, right? It's like, but whereas if, maybe those same people, like they're arguing on Facebook with their cousins or whatever, right? But like in this horse group, you're not arguing about politics or whatever. You're talking about the horse stuff. So I think there's something charming in that, right? That stuff that doesn't scale. And I hope we can get back to that more in a sense. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I'm curious. I haven't read Nadia's essay, Hidden Cities, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Does she say that it's like a good thing or like, because I've also heard another term, like the old CEO of Kickstarter, Yancey Strickler, wrote this essay called the dark forest theory of the internet. Yeah. So it's like, that's kind of a like, hey, this is a bad thing because we don't have any nice public spaces anymore on the internet.
Yeah, I think Nadia references that. I mean, she's super familiar with that cluster of work, right? Like that. Yeah, I mean, I can send you this and you can read it later on. But we'll do a live reading on air, word for word. It's like Andy Kaufman or something, just live reading, 3 hours long. Yeah, it's not actually that long, but I'll just send this to you for a reference. I keep track of a lot of this online community things. I find it fascinating, even though I don't like super want to participate myself, but it is on my radar, something that's interesting because, it's kind of like I've inadvertently grown like an audience online, right? Just from broadcasting things. And it's in the, several thousands to low 10,000s range. Right. And like, I don't encourage community aspects of that, but sometimes, stuff probably happens organic. And again, like we were talking about the beginning of the hour, it's like, if I had encouraged more people to email me or message me or contact me through a private group or whatever, I might get more serendipitous interactions. But then again, I have to filter out more, noise. So, just for me, I don't really care that much, but other people do. And I think it's great. I mean, I don't want to, and also like, I don't want to like speak out too much, quote unquote, against it. Cause like, I don't think it's a bad thing inherently. It's just personally not what I want to do, but it could be a very positive force if you manage it well, because you could form these really beautiful friendships and collaborations and just learn a lot from that way. So I've been talking too much. I should let you weigh in. I've just been rambling for a few minutes.
No, it's okay. I mean, that reminds me of, did you ever follow Zay Frank, who was like vlogging in like the late 2000s?
Yeah. I never really, he had this like zany sense of humor thing, right? Like
yeah.
I never really followed that much, but yeah, tell me about that.
Oh yeah. I mean, I just have this thing that's coming to my memory that's, he was like, had these funny vlogs and was vlogging every day, and he did a few like fun things with his community, and one of them was like he built this tool so that they could make an earth sandwich. So like one person would put a piece of bread on the ground and then like find their exact opposite on the globe, and that person would put a piece of bread on the ground and it would be an earth sandwich.
I think I
And I
heard
guess
about
like
this. Yeah.
they
Did they take
actually
a
did
picture?
it.
Is that the like
I think so.
you're supposed to take a picture? Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't know. I remember being like pretty enchanted by that, but I never really participated. I feel like whenever I know that the group is kind of big,
Mm-hmm.
I don't participate.
Yeah.
And actually, that reminds me of like why sometimes discussions in classes can be so hard.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I feel like that's something I've been trying to figure out. It's always so interesting, like just how you can change the energy of a class by making the groups different or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that dovetails well in the teaching of yeah, like there's so much of it that yeah, I think there's so much there, right? Like, and it's like, thinking about from the student's perspective, right? Like they're taking 4 classes or whatever, and they're, thinking about all these different things, but like there's something magical about an in-person class, right? That like you're kind of, I don't say forced, but like you're encouraged to be there. And if you're there, it's like, I'm spending this hour or this 2 hours here, right? Like I'm physically here. I gotten over the activation energy of showing up. And then like, what can we do here that like is, interesting and worthwhile? And I think there's a lot to do with that, but it's tricky to manage, right? And it's, kind of, I think about this with regard to teaching of like, what value are we delivering beyond just students looking up all this stuff online on their own or taking an online course or just following a bunch of tutorials about learning web development or whatever. Like there is this, both a technical factor of like curating, like you're saying, like choosing what to present and making assignments and lessons. And there's also this sort of like emotional, motivational factor that you bring in, and maybe the other students can feed off each other. And I think that people recognize it, right? When there is an interesting classroom experience, like, wow, this was worthwhile. Like, this is great. Like, I would never have learned this on my own or gotten this on my own. Like, and this kind of whole goes all the way back to this, all the stuff we're talking about that doesn't scale, right? That like this sort of personal interaction just doesn't scale. So like, how big are your classes? I'm curious.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry. No, that put a lot of like interesting thoughts into my head.
You can talk about other stuff too. Yeah. I'll let you go
yeah,
for
I
a while.
almost feel like it's like alchemical, like what happens in a class. And there's so many variables that go into it, like how many people are there, what everyone's mood is, the other classes they're taking, all this stuff. But yeah, I mean, my classes vary in size. The Yale classes that I teach tend to be a little bit, to be honest, like a little too big. Like, I don't know, usually 16 to 18 people. I have a TA, which is always super helpful, especially if the TA wants to work hard with me. And then, let's see. So I'm teaching like a new experimental course this semester at Rutgers for master's students. And it's actually own people, which is one of the classes I've ever taught, and it's like kind of like a breath of fresh air after teaching such large groups.
Wait, how many people at Rutgers? How many people?
5.
Oh wow.
Yeah. And so I'm actually making it quite tailored to them. Like I decided that the class would be like half one-on-one mentorship and half tutorials. Especially since they're master's students, I mean, they all have their own little path. And especially since the web could take, their special web project could take so many different turns. Yeah, to me, I mean, like a lot of the magic that happens in person kind of stuff is this adaptability or like this changeability. Like what could we do here together that like we couldn't do if we were like by ourselves, or like also we're in person, so we could like, act things out with our bodies. I mean, not that I do that too much, but there's just like so much potential there. And then, yeah, the other thing, I've been doing this independent school that just ended called Fruitful School. And that was interesting because my friend John and I, we we decided the concept ourselves and decided how many people we would take. We took 11, and it was a pretty good size. But the cool thing about that was deciding that people would apply to our school with an idea, like a proposal. And so we based like who got in half on the proposal, half on like kind of their motivations and qualifications for taking it. And I just felt like it was such a game changer to have people come in with something they like were really passionate about and wanted to like almost like start with the ground running, or what's that?
Hit the ground running, yeah.
Yeah, hit the ground running. Yeah.
That's so interesting. So, yeah, but there's so many threads. So for this Fruitful School, like, I guess, was this this is completely extracurricular? Was this part of your job? You know, how was this funded? You know, I'm not like, you don't need to tell all the tons of details. It's just, you know, how did this come about? Right?
Oh no, it's a good question.
Materialized.
Yeah, I mean, so one of my goals this past year has been, so I've been teaching now, I guess like since 2013. So I have like quite a handful of experience now. And, you know, I keep on teaching interactive design, and I'm kind of like, okay, I've taught the same stuff over again enough that I'm kind of ready almost like to publish or to export. And so one of my goals was to make my teaching just like more accessible, or like use the medium that I teach. And I kind of thought that I wanted to try something more independent, just because that would be a way of like activating that. And for example, yeah, I've always wanted to blog, but have always found like a difficulty like deciding what angle or approach. And suddenly like I'm blogging on the Fruitful School blog, and it's like I have a reason, like, you know, I need to attract students. But I guess I was going to say, yeah, I did it with my friend John, who also wanted to do a school. We were inspired by a school for poetic computation, SFPC, which you know a little bit about, run by Tae-Yoon Choi and a bunch of other great people. And yeah, I mean, we just, you know, we kind of backtracked it, like how much would we want to make that's fair to students. We decided to charge like just $1,200 per student for 6 weeks. We offered 2 half-price spots if people applied for them. And then it was hosted by Pioneer Works, which is an art institution in Red Hook, Brooklyn. And we kind of made a trade with them. Like one of the participants of the class like worked there.
So that was your space. That was
our
space. Yeah, the physical space. Yeah.
Yeah. So we really lucked out there, I think. Yeah, and we're thinking about a next iteration, and we're still like game planning that. But we also have a dream of like exporting some of our teachings online, or like almost like selling them as guides, kind of a thing.
Yeah, like this sort of, I mean, all of this stuff fascinates me. It's, you know, I guess the reason I like talking to you and folks like you is that like I get to like sort of live vicariously and like pretend like I could do this stuff. I'm like, yeah, that would be awesome. And except like my day-to-day life, I don't do any of this stuff. It's the same with like all this online communities thing, or the stuff you said, like your thing about the horses and like when you were growing up. And I'm like, yeah, this is something I would have loved to do, except I just, you know, sat there and like played games and just like took classes and like did my homework every day. Like I had a very mundane upbringing, right? Like I was fine, but like I kind of always had this desire to like that whole thing you're talking about, the horses. I mean, not exactly horses in particular, but something like that, right? And the same thing now you're talking about, you know, starting up the school. And, you know, I have this friend, Julia Evans, who does the zines or zines or whatever. Like she does a lot of the, you know, for how do you learn Git? How do you learn Linux? And she actually made a business out of it, right? She's now full-time. She was working, I think, at Stripe as an engineer and doing these zines and comics and stuff. And then she sold them, you know, she's like, you know, I can post them for free, but then, you know, if you want to buy them, and I think that she went full time into like just running her business, selling these explainers and zines, and she blogs a lot. And she went through Hacker School. I guess it's called the Recurse Center now. I think I met her through that, actually. So
cool. Like
your thing is like in that spirit of, you know, small number, you know, 1 or 2 people getting together, starting up this stuff, you know, not with the intention necessarily of making it a business or whatever, but just like because it's cool, and maybe this could be sustainable in some way in the future. But yeah, so like that sort of vibe I really like. It's just that my day to day I like don't do any of that. So I want to talk to people who do that. So
Oh, I mean, I feel like though that you kind of get that vibe out through your vlogging and everything, like your kind of exploration modes, from what I can tell anyway. I mean, I imagine it would be fun to like see what happens if you someday don't teach in an institution, but yeah, I don't know. I guess everyone has their own way of like unlocking that kind of energy.
yeah,
Right.
and I think I take a more, kind of incremental or conservative approach in that, like, I like the stability of having my current job, even though there's a lot of overhead with it and there's a lot of, job stuff, but at the same time, if I have the bandwidth to do these videos and to do the writing and everything, I find that's a good creative expression. And also like the thing is like, as academics, we have a lot of flexibility in that, in the summers, in theory, I think for most or all university professors who are on a full-time salary same thing with K-12 teachers, right? Like our official salary is 9 months for the school year. And in the summer, we're technically unpaid unless you get grants or you do other consulting. So like in theory, if you just spend your summer like starting up a thing or doing a thing, like that's all your own time, right? But in practice, since I'm running a research group and I have administrative responsibilities, in practice in the summer you're, it's the same job. But in theory, that's the case. Or you take sabbaticals or other stuff. So it is still a more flexible career path for this sort of thing than if you were working at a traditional company where you just have like 10 vacation days or whatever, and it's very hard to get these side things really off the ground, because then your company's like, whoa, are you like supposed to be doing, it's like weird to do this other thing with this, like, yeah. So I still think that in a university setting, it's still the best approximation to this sort of lifestyle that's possible. Yeah, so that's my thoughts on that.
Cool. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I'm not full-time anywhere yet at an institution, but sometimes I'm like, is that what's next for me? Like, I guess like becoming tenured somewhere eventually. Yeah, I mean, we'll see. I feel like that would make sense, but we'll see.
Yeah. And this podcast hour is not meant to be a career planning. Definitely not meant to be career planning. It's like
sorry, it's probably like in the back of my mind. It just like came out.
Yeah. No, I think it makes a lot of sense. I mean, another interest of mine really is how, I think, I never started out doing all that stuff with a theme, but I think a theme has really started coalescing in latter years around how do you just sustain like individual creative work? I think that's what I'm really interested in. And like, there's like two threads, and maybe they'll come together. Like one is this idea of tacit or unspoken expert knowledge, right? It's like, as experts, we have all this tacit, unspoken knowledge, and how do we just put that out in the world? One great example, I want to say it's a great example, it's so self-promoting. One appropriate example is, I just got this NSF grant that it's called NSF Career Award, which is like a major grant that junior faculty and sciences get. And I talked to some colleagues, I'm like, can I just like put up my grant proposal? And like, no one really does that because people are like, oh, you got to keep it private. I'm like, I already got the thing. I don't really care anymore, right? It's like, so I put up my proposal and I also annotated it. I just, made margin notes and I annotated my process of like, here's why I wrote this way and stuff, with the hope that by showing examples, this is how people really learn, right? You can imagine reading a blog post or a book that's like, here's how you write a research grant. Step 1, write an introduction. Step 2, write the related work. And it's like, yeah, duh, you have to do all that. But how do you actually do that, right? So, and I think basically what I tell people is go find someone in your field or go find a few people in your field and read their actual grants as examples. And for mine, I'm just writing this as a note. For mine, and sorry, I can't type and talk at the same time.
That's okay.
Like for mine, it's about, I want to annotate the thought process as well. So like, and I think a lot of the other things that I put up online that have been useful for people have basically been sharing a lot of the knowledge that people think kind of go unspoken, right? Like, how do you get into certain graduate programs, or how do you get into certain things? Like, there are things that are often unspoken. Same thing with videos. So like the other thread I'm really interested in is the sustaining individual creative work, I guess, right? So like individual meaning I'm more interested in, folks like yourself or you with one friend, one or two people doing stuff. Creative work, it's a very broad definition. And then sustaining, I think, is the key, right? Of like, how do you do this in a sustainable way over many years, over trying to build up a career, whether it's a career in it or building a career in something related so that you can have an income so you can sustain that work. And that just really interests me, and that sort of aesthetic of how do people continue that. My current path is this more university path where, I do a lot of very mainstream university things, but I also feel like there are some synergies with the more sort of public things I do, more so than if I was working at like a super secret startup or something where 24 hours a day you're coding and you don't have any time to think about independent creative projects, right? That's that's the other extremes. You're at a stealth mode startup where everyone's working 80-hour weeks coding on some secret product, and you have no energy left for this sort of stuff we talk about, I would say.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot about how to maintain momentum, or like kind of what are the forces that activate me, or like, keep something going. And something that I sense from what you do is that you really like just kind of try to get like the minimum viable thing going. So like, you can put it out there and like see what happens. And I think that kind of attitude can be really healthy, especially when you're like trying stuff out. And I think part of the thing we did with Fruitful School was to make it like a certain level of like, I don't know, like chill almost, or just like, I do think that part of teaching is like setting the mood or environment. I mean, some people would argue that teaching is all about, creating the right learning environment. It's not really about what you share. It's actually like the things you do and like the mood around. But I don't know. I think momentum is super fascinating. And also another reason I love individuals' websites is how you can see how they've changed throughout the many years. And like that path is just so unique to each person. And that's also another thing I really like. I saw on your website you have like the eras that you wrote different things. Like,
oh yeah.
Yeah, so like people can put, I don't know, some grains of salt behind like what you wrote as a high school student. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean that came about because like this is again the sustaining thing, right? Like if you had something up for 20 plus years, there's like probably boneheaded stuff I wrote about 20 years ago that I wouldn't really, subscribe to now. That said though, I think I don't think I ever like, even back in the old days, like I don't think I ever published stuff that were too raw and too like controversial or obscene or whatever. I don't think I ever, like, just not my own personality to do that. But I think there were a few articles that I either took down or I like probably like cut out parts of it. Like it wasn't because it was like really bad or anything, but it was just more like, I don't really need it up there, right? So like, but for the most part, I leave everything up with that caveat. I basically leave everything up and with a caveat that, okay, this was written 15 years ago. If you're going to quote this out of context, it's kind of like whatever.
That makes sense. Cool. Yeah. Oh, and speaking of writing, I noticed, well, maybe I wanted to share like this device that I've been playing with lately.
Oh, cool.
So, okay. So this is like this little typewriter that's called the Pomera. And it's basically just, let's see. So it has like an e-ink display.
Oh, nice.
And it just saves text files to like this SD card.
Oh, wow. It's called Pomero.
Oh, Pomera.
Okay.
It's like almost like Pomeranian, but just like Pomera. And I bought it in Japan this summer. So, and I guess it was made like in 2009.
Oh, wow. It's pretty old.
Yeah, I've just been writing on it because I want to write more, and I feel like I'm really interested in changing my environment and the tools I use to like influence the kind of state I'm in when I'm writing. And anyway, I'm not saying like this is the perfect solution to like get to the right state, but it's like one of a few tools and techniques that I've been trying lately. And yeah, I guess I brought this up because I know that you're also experimenting with writing. You started like a Substack, right?
Yeah, that's the newsletter. Yeah, the email newsletter.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, but one thing I'm trying to do with this is like I really want to attain this state of writing where like I start writing about something I'm interested in, and then, you know, I don't really know exactly what I'm going to write, and so it just kind of like materializes on the page. Like I don't have too many preconceptions when I'm going into it, and kind of just like use the space to explore rather than to like, you know, write out something I had thought about really hard beforehand.
Yeah, that's interesting because that is a you know, also forces you not to look at other things, right? So like, you know, the one kind of writing is, okay, I know what I'm going to write, and I got to write some stuff out, and then I know some links I'm going to put in there, so I'm going to search the web, put some links in. It's very reference oriented. But this is like, you know, this is the closest you can get to just handwriting, right? Except it's more convenient to type. I mean,
Right.
have you ever thought about just handwriting stuff too, or is that just too much work?
No, I definitely have. I guess, yeah, I think what I like about this is just that it like helps me envision like a possible future of like what I'd like computing to be more like.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you know, I use some notebooks too, but I don't know. There's something about the potential future this implies I get excited about.
Yeah, I mean, there's this idea about, you know, dedicated devices for things, right? And the hope is if these things get cheap enough, then we would be in this, you know, Star Trek future where we just have little pads of stuff, right? It's just like pads of paper, right? I mean, it was a Xerox PARC future, and also the Star Trek future of just like, and we're kind of getting there in the way. I mean, like, this is my old phone from a few years ago, and I don't use this phone anymore, the phone, because I got a new phone, but it like works, right? So I basically use this as like a mini iPad thing. I don't have much installed on it. I just use it to watch videos or like do email or something around the house. It's like a tiny iPad. And although of course this is still expensive, right? But if we had cheaper devices that it's like, oh, maybe like imagine a world where you had like 5 of those or 10 of those, and each one is holding some essay, right? It's like each one is just a notebook, and you bring it around with you, and maybe they sync with each other or something. And it's, you know, if you lose one, oh, that's fine. It was only $10, right? And like, I think this sort of, if technology gets, that's why I'm really excited about this embedded low cost technology, because then it really changes the relationship with it. Because nowadays, you know, having a laptop, you only have one laptop or one tablet or one thing, and it's very valuable, obviously. But it also has, because there's only one, you have to put everything on it. So then you get distracted, right? And I think I and some others have taken to, you know, uninstalling most of the apps on our phones and like turning off all notifications and really just crippling our phones, because the default is just to have overwhelm. So there's definitely something there.
Yeah, totally. And that reminds me, this summer I also bought an extra. So I've been using an iPod as like my primary phone for a while. A dumb phone, so I kind of like took my phone out of my phone in a way, because the iPod is basically an iPhone without the phone. And then this past summer I bought another iPod, so I have 2 iPods, and one of the iPods like doesn't have any social apps on it, so it's like my pure iPod. And
Wait, you mean a pad?
I take it.
Pad or pod?
Oh, pod.
Oh, wow.
I mean, I can show you. Show you. They're like 1 second.
Wow, this is live narrating here. Wow.
No, just like iPod Touch.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
yeah.
So these are okay. Yeah. Okay, got it. I thought you got the one with the wheel. I'm like, I'm so confused.
I do
yeah,
have...
that makes sense. Yeah, I had that back 10 years ago also. Right. It's basically this without the phone part.
Exactly.
They still sell this, or is that you sold?
Yeah, no, they do.
Oh, really? I didn't know they still sold them. That
Yeah,
makes
and I
sense,
mean,
but I don't know why I never thought about it. Huh.
Yeah, I was in this funny situation of like I wanted to get a camera, but I realized that if I got a digital camera, I probably would never use it. So I was just like, I want to get another iPod. And since then, it's kind of become this interesting thing where it's like it's almost easier just to choose one versus the other than to like delete all my social apps, you know?
Yeah.
So it's kind of like in a way I think like a cybernetic sort of I don't know, system, like where I just make one simple choice in the morning, like which pill to take, like the blue pill or the red pill or
Yeah.
whatever.
No, that's really cool. And like speaking of that, I mean there are like super cheap Android phones too, right? Like
Mm.
especially if you really want to go low fidelity, I mean there are cheap Android phones and you can just get them used or something. So you can have like instead of getting one iPhone, you can have like 10 of those cheap little Android things, right? They're probably flaky, they're probably like half broken, but you're like, hey, you have a fleet of little like cheap plastic phones that you can just go and surf the web or text or something. So um, I think there's something really fascinating in that.
Yeah.
Um, so we got a few minutes left. I'm wondering what last minute thoughts or questions or things that you have while a
Oh,
plane flies overhead. I'm going to mute myself. There's a giant.
okay. I guess I have like a really specific question for you that's like, I noticed your URL is PG bovine, and I was just wondering like what's up with the bovine? Is that like a sort of like pig reference or yeah.
Yeah, that's a common question. Well, bovine is a
Oh,
cow reference, right? Bovine's cow.
oh, yeah, okay. Pardon me.
Yeah, I've been asked this in various guises over the years, and like, so the real answer is that that was like the username I picked when I started college at MIT, because you had to pick like a username, right? And like most people just pick their first name, last name, whatever, first initial, the standard. But like I think I didn't really know that at the time, but like there was this culture, especially back then, of people picking, random names, right? And and I just got inspired because I really didn't like just having my initial and name. Um, it's like such a random story because I always associated that with PE class. So like in physical education class, we'd have our like uniforms, and they would just be like your first initial, your middle initial, and your last name, and that would be your email address in a way, right? If you just did one initial or two initials and last name or first name last name, it's like you couldn't do first name last name because it was only 8 letters back then. So that's why people were forced to use initial, first initial last name or first and middle initial. And when I got to UCSD, like their default one they set for me was, my initials, which I didn't really want. My initials and last name. So like I had this bad association with PE class because I hated PE class. So I'm like, I don't want to pick like the initial thing. So then I like PG. I like my first and last initial, but that was too short. You couldn't have 2 letters. I think you had to have at least three to 8 or something, right? So then bovine just fit there perfectly because there's like 6 more letters, and also like I don't know. I liked cows growing up. I didn't like grow up on a farm or anything, but like it was always a concept I liked, and I just thought it had a funny ring to it, and it just it literally just stuck from there, right? Because then once that came, and my first website was at MIT. Well, I guess my first college website, and it was like, it was slash PG bovine, and then I just kept it throughout everything I went because it's like a nice, unique. It's just like a nice, unique name. That's basically it.
Cool. No, that's a nice story. Um, yeah, it makes me wonder if like cows have been any kind of like subliminal influence for you. But yeah,
Yeah, it's funny. Like I don't do much with cows, right? It's not like it's a shtick, right? There's no theme, right? It's not like it's like a marketing shtick or anything where my website is all cow theme, right? It actually, I think maybe that's what
right.
makes it so funny that there is nothing cow related anywhere. It's just that name.
Yeah. No, it's really nice. I feel like there's always like some mystery I see every time I look at it and I'm like, wow, I still haven't. I mean, I'm sure you've said it before in like your vlog, but I couldn't uncover the mystery of the bovine.
Yeah, it's nothing profound. I mean, it really is
Okay.
a decision I made when I was like 17. Like in the summer, right before starting college, you have to sign up for an account, and like the box was staring at you to sign up for a name. So I actually did think about it quite a bit because I'm like, I don't want just like my first and last name because it was like PE class. Um, some other people just had really wacky ones. Like I don't remember what people had, but like I don't know if like kids realize from, when you're 17 that your university email, it's going to go on your resume and all that stuff. I mean, I don't think anyone had anything that bad, but it's just funny to think about. And I think now, like, probably students just do, like, they probably just suggest the default. And, like, I'm sure students now don't care about email as much, right? I don't think, just my hunch, my old person hunch is that, like, email addresses are not as much of an identity anymore. It's just like, oh, whatever, it's my school email, like, first, last name, whatever. Like, everyone had. Now that I think about it, yeah, like, pretty much all the students that I've had or my TAs and stuff, I'm just thinking about their email, like, they're all just standard. The school probably just suggests a few, right? First name, last name, first initial, last name, first name, whatever. And they just probably pick one. I think their other parts of their online identity are much more important than email address at this point.
Cool. That makes sense. Cool. Yeah. I mean, I don't know if there's anything else major. I mean, I feel like I feel like I have a whole slew of things that we could talk about, but it might go on for too long. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think this is good. This is an hour and a half mark, which is good. It's a good, it's like a movie, right? Like a movie length. It's a very epic movie length.
Epic movie.
90 minutes. Yeah. I mean, I wish you the best of luck in, building up momentum and sustaining momentum on these sorts of creative ventures. And, I'd be happy to help. I was gonna say I'd be happy to help advertise on Twitter, but I can't do I can't do Twitter anymore, so I'm off Twitter or any other social media.
Okay. Well, yeah. I mean, even email is a social media, so like
newsletter. That's true. Yeah.
Yeah. So
I'll post this on.
Cool. But yeah, I really appreciate you taking the time and going out on this cold email venture.
Yeah, I wonder what the next level is. Or maybe the next level is I just approach somebody and have them be on my podcast without even them approaching me like, who are you?
Wow. Yeah. That'll
like
be
on
pretty
the street or something. Like, I think I have reached out to some people, but like, no, I guess like, yeah, I mean, I guess yours wasn't the most unknown, right? Because like, yeah, I mean, I guess I reached out to some people because they wrote a blog post. I'm like, oh, this is really interesting. Let's talk about it. But usually it's like, there's at least one mutual connection, right? It's like, it's not totally out of the blue, but I might do a really out of the blue thing. I have an idea for it, but I don't want to like talk about it unless, because it probably won't work out. But I do have an idea for like the most out of the blue thing. So stay tuned.
Okay, cool. Oh, and I have one last thing.
Sure.
Is I've been working on a small podcast that I don't know if you're interested. You might be a good fit for, called HTML Energy.
Okay.
And it's about like the energy inside of HTML, or like using kind of like raw basic materials.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so far I've recorded like 4 or 5 podcasts, and I just commissioned like a jingle for the podcast.
Oh, wow. So
hopefully it will go out soon.
That's cool. Yeah, I'd be happy to do it. Yeah. Also, very good strategy to ask on air. So I'm like, yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh, okay. You can deny me in
no, it's
the
good,
email.
It's good. Well, I mean, I can always edit this part out too. But
right.
No, I'm good. I think I'll be fine.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Laura. We'll go offline. We'll chat a bit. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thanks. Bye.